Hi, this is Kanaya, your hostess for New Thoughts, New Life. And today is Sunday, March 11th, 2018, and I'm happy to be here. I am going to be solo today. My co-hostess, Sandra Kinnebrew, is unable to join us. And today we're going to go through chapter 9 of A Course in Miracles. Before we get into the text, I want to take a moment, just get ourselves grounded in this space of the divine. So if you're with me live or with the replay, doesn't matter. Just take a moment for me. Breathe in and release. We'll do that 2 more times. Grounding ourselves in the awareness, the one power, the one presence, Mother, Father, God, Creator, Spirit, whichever term resonates with you. We're just taking a moment to be in the space of it, to know it, to be aware of its presence, to know that it is the source of everything. Therefore, it is in everything. We are surrounded by it, imbued with it. And understanding that and knowing that the divine in me is but one individualized expression of the greater. I say that this session today is for my good, it's for your good, and it's for the good of every person whose life it touches directly or indirectly. And that people, I, whomever, will receive revelation, instructions, inspiration to move forward into life, knowing that we are loved, God is love, we are loved, we are lovable, we are worthy, we are divine, we are good. Because we are creations of God, and everything God creates is good. And so it is. So, chapter 9 of A Course in Miracles. So, a little bit about what this is all about. This is your first time joining me. The text we're working with is A Course in Miracles. There. All right. This book comes in 3 parts. We'll say it's a workbook for students, it's a manual for teachers, and it has a text. The text is an interesting perspective on, it's like a message to us from Jesus Christ through a conduit. The author is not important because this person was just being a vessel and sharing information. And the workbook is awesome because it takes the information in the text and it translates it into daily lessons, ways for you to begin to understand it, feel it, not just intellectually, but actually begin to transform your mind. In New Thought, which I call metaphysical Christianity mysticism, we look at the Bible, one, allegorically. We look at Jesus as the great teacher, the great example, our big brother. And we believe that God is love and that we are individualized expressions of God. And as extensions of God, we too are love. We realize that God is good. And so, therefore, as extensions of God, we too are good. So it's a new way of thinking, why we call it New Thought, which is a little bit different than sometimes what people know as traditional Christianity, where it comes from this idea of original sin and, fall from grace. We talk about it in terms of, let's call it a fall from grace, would be a separation, meaning that we have forgotten who we are and whose we are. And so what our goal is to do is to have atonement or at one ment coming back together, which makes today's topic in chapter so apropos, but it's called the acceptance of the atonement. So inside of the course, the first 9 chapters, or first 8 chapters, I'm just getting to the beginning of chapter 9. Here we go. The first 9 chapters or 8 chapters, it lays the groundwork. And here we're getting into the acceptance of the atonement. What does it mean to become one with the divine? To remember who we are and why we are and what that means. And I enjoyed this. I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing. This is not my first time going through this text. Um, I was turned on to this maybe almost 10 years ago now. It was a gift. There's a book called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. I recommend it for people if you're just getting started on this because she kind of breaks it down in a way that makes it easier to understand. And so if you read that book and you come back and read The Course in Miracles, you can kind of see some of the things. In this chapter, there's actually a quote from Marianne Williamson that many of us know very often has been attributed to the great Nelson Mandela. Um, but it's actually from Marianne Williamson. And it talks about our greatness. And I'm pulling it up now because that's what's there for me, is to open with this. And so therefore I'm going to do it. Here it is. It says here that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. That is such a powerful quote, right? And we know it's powerful because it has been repeated time after time again in many different speeches, I'm sure papers, report, like all the time. And that really, for me, sums up chapter 9, the acceptance of the atonement. But as I'll move through the chapter, though, because there's so much good stuff in here. It starts off talking about the acceptance of reality, right? And how many of us fear God. Like we are raised to fear God, right? And so it just starts off at the very beginning. Fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for it to be afraid of what it really is. So the whole idea behind this is that, again, if we are individualized expression of the divine, and if you're someone who has have any background in Christianity, you'll know that in Genesis it talks about God saying he's going to make us in its image, or in their image, actually. We read the text. Excuse me. And so with that being the case, let me just turn this off. Awesome. If we are extensions of God, then God's will is our will. And so if we're afraid of God, then we're really afraid of ourselves. And the question is why? And a lot of what we talk about in the Course in Miracles is the ego, and how the ego is this interesting concept in our mind that has had us forget who we truly are. And so our journey is one to be clear that there is something called an ego, and then to begin to liberate ourselves from the ego. But that is what takes some time because our entire world is designed around the ego. The ego believes in conflict and competition and lack and scarcity. When in reality, there is none of those things really have a place. There's no need to hoard or, excuse me, attack, because there's more than enough. But that's not a common conversation. And so just because it's not common doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that it's typical. And so most of us operate in this fear mindset, and we fear God. And we're taught to fear God. Well, God is nothing to be feared. God is love. There's nothing to be fearful of. And God wants us to be well taken care of, healthy, happy, abundant. And our access to that comes from learning how to humble the ego and stand in God's glory, which is distinct from being arrogant. It's simply acknowledging God is great. The creator of everything that exists in this world would have to be great, right? And if we're an aspect of it, then we too are great. My personal favorite word is fabulous, but whatever floats your boat. So one of the things we have to get is that our true will is the will of God. And learning to distinguish between what the world is telling us we should want and what our spirit is really telling us what we want. And that's one of the hardest things that we have to do. But that's what's real. What's for our highest, best, and good is God's will. Even though the world would have us believe otherwise. Right. So that was the first part of this. It really talked about like getting what reality is and what your true will is. And if you understand that, then the choices you make change, because your will is your salvation. But you got to know what your will is. And this is the thing, and this is what I get. This is again chapter 9 in the text, section 1, paragraph 9. It says, ultimately, everyone must remember the will of God, because ultimately everyone must recognize himself. Now, this text sometimes uses the male pronoun. It was written back before we got really clear that, God is not a gender. God is really everything. It's male, female, it's an it, right? And we're all included in the sonship or the childrenship. They had someone who's like, that was a sticking point for them. And so, yeah, just when you read, make the appropriate substitutions. But all of our journey is eventually to recognize ourselves. And whether it takes you this lifetime, a few years, a few months, or you got to do this a couple of times, ultimately, you got to get who you are, because you got to reconnect with source, with spirit. And so God being love, it's not even something to accept. It's just like what is. And it's like, it does, but we should accept it, not even believe it. And we can try to deny it, but that doesn't change anything. And I love this quote where it says, it is indeed possible for you to deny facts, such as God is love, although it's impossible for you to change them. If you hold your hands over your eyes, you will not see, because you're interfering with the laws of seeing. But me holding my hands over my eyes doesn't change what it means to see. It just means I'm choosing not to see. So God is love. And whether or not we choose to see God as love, it doesn't change the fact that that's what God is. Love. Love, love, love. And as child of God, we too are love. And so I love this. At the end of that section, we're given this affirmation. Christ is in me, and where he is, God must be, for Christ is part of him. And so one of the things we talk about is the Christ nature. So if you heard the story of Jesus, Jesus started off as like Jesus, son of Mary and Joseph, Jesus of Nazareth, right? The man from Galilee. But then eventually he became known as Jesus Christ. And that was part of the awakening. And so as we go on our journey to become aware of the God within us, we awaken the Christ nature, that Christ, that light within us. And so one thing is that I could be Kanaya Christ, you could be whatever your name is, Christ. For Sandra, who's my co-hostess, could be for Sandra Christ, because that means that we're operating in our Christ nature, as opposed to more of our earthly or egoic nature. So when I'm just being Kanaya, like Kanaya sometimes can be off track, letting her ego run things. But if I'm being Kanaya Christ, then I'm being spirit led. And so part of this, a major part of this journey is becoming spirit led, more so operating in our Christ nature more than we're operating in our egoic nature. I'm trying to get back to chapter 9 here. So then we move on to the answer to prayer, right? So when we get reality, okay, it's like, oh, okay, this is what's real. And then we get to prayer. So a lot of times people say, I pray and I ask for things and God didn't answer my prayers. And it could be about anything. Maybe like for me, my sister was sick. And I can't say that I prayed to ask God to save her because I've done enough work to know that that's not necessarily what's for her highest, best, and good. And so I've learned to pray for the highest, best, and good for whatever situation I find myself in. And that sometimes doesn't always seem like it's an answered prayer, but it always is. And one of my favorite parts of this section was it says there are many answers you've already received, but you have not yet heard. So it says in the text, chapter 9, section 2, paragraph 3. The Bible emphasizes that all prayer is answered. And this is indeed true. The very fact that the Holy Spirit has been asked for anything will ensure a response. Yet, it is equally certain that no response given by Him, meaning the Holy Spirit, thus God, will ever be one that would increase fear. It is possible that His answer will not be heard. It is impossible, however, that it will be lost. There are many answers you already received but have not yet heard. I assure you that they are waiting for you. So what that's talking about is that there's this idea, again, that if we're operating with a fear of God, is that we're not really clear about who God is and who we are. But the moment we stop resisting God's will, which is truly our will, we can stop being afraid of it. So people say, if I'm not out here living according to what society says, then I don't know who I'll be. And there's a fear. Or if I quit my job because it doesn't feel right? It doesn't make my heart sing. I don't feel it's my purpose. But then I'm afraid, how will I take care of myself? When we learn and we understand that God truly has our back, Spirit provides, then when we get this notion to do things like leave a career or a relationship or whatever it may look like, that there's no need to be afraid because Spirit's not going to direct us to anything that's going to harm us. So if we're experiencing fear, either it's not of God or we're not operating in our Christ self. We're operating in our ego. The ego fears things that Spirit tells us to do because they're pretty much diametrically opposed. But this isn't like a debate of good and evil, God and the devil, because ego isn't real. It really has no power. We give it all of its power by choosing not to put it in its place. So when we choose love, when we choose light, when we choose to operate in our Christ nature, and we choose to trust Spirit, we also are choosing to let go of fear and to rest and be certain that all is well and everything is unfolding for our highest, best, and good. And then we're able to hear the answers to the prayers. A lot of the times our prayers get answered, but we don't necessarily like what it's saying, so we're ignoring it. But it's always there and it's always waiting for us. And that's what's good to know. And beyond that, one of the things it talks about is that a lot of times our answers to our prayers don't come to us, they come through others to us. Because we're all in this together, as they call it, the sonship or the brotherhood or the sisterhood or the familyhood or the childrenhood, whatever term works for you. And so you'll be going through something, and typically someone might give you a word, whether that word comes from an actual person, it can come from an image, it can come from a lot of different ways. But a lot of what we have to get isn't about an individual relationship like that. A lot of it is here, brother to brother, sister to sister. Learn to be here for and with one another so that we can receive our blessings. If that makes sense. And I know it may not make sense, but that's part of the journey. I'm learning to open up, learning to share, because we have so much to offer one another. And we've talked about before that the more you share, the more you're able to receive. The more you give, the more you have space to receive. If I have something here in my hand and then I give it away, then I have space to receive something more. And that something more tends to come from the divine. So who we are is continuing as we receive to give. That's part of the reason why we're doing New Thought, New Life. Because as I receive, I have to start giving, because I had all this information and it was stuck in here. And then you reach a point where you can't receive anymore because you haven't released enough. So what I can say is that prayers do get answered. And part of our job as it were, is to learn how to receive the answers to our prayers. Let's learn how to receive the answers to our prayers. All right. I'm going to keep moving along through this. Ooh. And then one of the other things I took away from this week was talking about the idea of judgment, in that there's a difference between sharing information with someone and then judging someone, because we don't want to judge, nor do we want to be judged. So you can give someone a word and then release them to process it and deal with it as they are, and then accept whatever they're doing is them on their way, whatever that looks like. Because when we start to judge whether something is good or bad or right or wrong, we open ourselves to that same kind of judgment. Now, there could be things that I say that work and things that don't work. And if things aren't workable, then you have to make necessary adjustments. But there's a difference between judgment, it's text 7, right, and acceptance. It's just between workability and just saying something's wrong. You can say, hey, I get it, that's your thing, but that doesn't work for me. And I find a lot of people that frustrates them. When I'm not necessarily calling them wrong, I'm just saying, I got it, but that doesn't work for me. And so if it doesn't work for me, then we're not going to be able to interact, because it has to be workable. And it could work for you, and it could work for somebody else, right? And so I want you to do what works for you, and I got to do what works for me. And if these two things don't mesh, that just means we don't work together, and that's okay. And so what it talks about at the end of this particular section, it says, because I will to know myself, I see you as God's son and my brother. And that means that when we're out in this world and we're interacting with people, no matter how they may be acting and how ugly we may think it is or how wrong, even in this political climate, to still look at someone as our brother, as our sister, and to definitely pray for them, right? But also to give them the space to be on their journey, Correction of error. So this was interesting because we're talking about, again, judgment, and then how you can even have a word from someone. And so if you point out the errors of your brother egos, if you point out the error of your brother's ego, you must be seeing through yours, because the Holy Spirit does not perceive his errors. So this is great. You've heard probably when people say, like, if there's something about someone that irritates you, it's something that's being reflected in yourself. So error judgment in others is really just an opportunity for you to look internally and to see, how does that apply to me? Because otherwise things won't necessarily bother you. Excuse me. It's become like I said, oh, that's not workable. But you don't have to be upset. You're not enraged. You don't need to attack them. You need to make them wrong. It's kind of like, well, yeah, that doesn't work for me. And so that's a slight distinction, but it's a powerful distinction because something not working and just like, yeah, is different than I'm upset. I feel disrespected. I feel betrayed. So all those are like attack feelings, right? Like if someone's disrespecting you or someone has betrayed you, all of that is like being attacked and something's happening to you. But being able to say, that doesn't work for me. It's just kind of like, yeah, you know what, like for me, if someone wanted to do the color scheme of, I don't know, like orange and green, I'm not really a big fan of that. It doesn't work for me. I don't think it's a wrong color scheme. I'm just like, well, hey, if you like it, that's great for you, but we're not going to put that in my house because that doesn't work for me. I'm not upset by it, right? And imagine if you were to go through life and have situations that didn't trigger you, where you didn't feel attacked, like you're just kind of like, yeah, that doesn't work to me. And so when we find ourselves feeling triggered, feeling attacked, understand that means we're typically operating in ego versus spirit versus our Christ nature. And it becomes a trigger to look like, ooh, I got off track. Don't make yourself wrong, but it's an opportunity for self-correction. We can correct ourselves. Don't worry about correcting others. It's up to everyone to do self-correction. We can correct ourselves. So you find yourself upset, feeling attacked, feeling judged, judging over here. Self-correct. The Holy Spirit's plan for forgiveness. Everybody is loved. How about that? The atonement is for everyone. No person is left out. Now, when one of us gets there is a personal journey, and it is a result of our personal decisions, but it's for all of us. And that's a beautiful thing to me, because then it gets rid of this notion that there is some kind of chosen people. We're all chosen. We're all chosen. So when I talk about the opening quote, when she's like, not just some of us shine, we all shine. We're all designed to shine. So this is for everybody. And forgiveness, to be clear, isn't about overlooking what someone's done. So there was a conversation I had. People were asking, how do I forgive? I'm going to pull this up because Spirit revealed this to me. It was like, how does one forgive? Particularly when, something has happened that you feel is egregious, right? Um, and so forgiveness isn't about seeing that someone did something wrong and choosing to look past it. That's not forgiveness. That's overlooking it. And that's the ego feeling like, oh, I'm being altruistic. Look at me. Look what I'm doing. That's not forgiveness. Okay. Forgiveness means looking past the error and seeing the truth of who someone is, right? So when I talk about practical steps to release and forgive, I said number one is like we reflect. We take some time. We're going to pray. We're going to meditate. We're going to thank Spirit for revealing to you the good in the scenario. So that's what I mean. Like we look beyond it. So you know what? There's something good in this. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened because everything's conspiring for my highest, best, and good. I just got to figure out what it is. That's sometimes easier said than done, but it's doable. I say you got to record it. When you've done this meditation, when you ask for this to be revealed to you, you want to journal, not type, but write if you can. Because a lot of times when you get this stuff flowing, it'll, oh, okay, I got it. You want to speak words of forgiveness. I always say out loud, I forgive whoever for doing whatever, and I release this into the loving energy of the divine. We express gratitude. I'm so grateful to whomever for being a messenger to me in my life, or for whatever situation, for being a messenger to me in my life. I received this message, I have learned from it, and I never need to repeat it again. And you repeat this until you're really able to look past the error, or what's the perceived error, right? And get the good and see it as it truly is. The more that we do this, the more that we operate in this kind of energy, the more we begin to see miracles in our life, because we're no longer seeing attack and wrong and bad and good. And so we are open to seeing and manifesting more miracles. So the more we operate in our Christ nature, the more miracles we have in our life. And this is called A Course in Miracles. So what we're really trying to learn in this text is how to be in our Christ nature so that miracles become standard, that our life becomes wondrous. And people, and we ask ourselves, wow, how did I get here? How did I get here? This is amazing. This is wonderful. I'm not even sure how it ended up happening, because we just kept following Christ, kept following the Christ nature. And so when we talk about the second coming of Christ, this is really about us as a people, as the sonship, returning to sense, returning to the sense of our true will and our true desire, which is good. And so we move into a part of the text that was really interesting for me, talking about the unhealed healer. And this has to do sometimes with our preachers, our teachers, because we're mostly in the metaphysical realm here. But the same can be said of therapists and sometimes of doctors. There are people who are out here in the healing arts who aren't healed. And this is not so much in the physical realm. For example, if your arm is broken, right? If your doctor's arm is broken too, it's obvious that they're going to have some trouble, right, fixing your arm. But let's talk about matters of the heart and the head, the mind, the emotions. So while God's plan for forgiveness, like I said, is looking beyond the error and seeing like the truth of it, the ego is part of it, is like learn to overlook it, right? And forgive it anyway. Anyway. Many unhealed healers are operating from that mindset, right? And I've done it all. I've done coaching, I've done some therapy, and then I've done this kind of spiritual healing work. What I can tell you is that for me, learning how to truly see the good as opposed to trying to not be caught up in the bad is very powerful, and it's very liberating. But it's not always what we're taught and trained in inside of traditional healing modalities. So in the unhealed healer section, it says the ego's plan for forgiveness is far more widely used than God's. This is because it is undertaken by unhealed healers and is therefore of the ego. Let us consider the unhealed healer more carefully now. By definition, he is trying to give what he has not received. If an unhealed healer is a theologian, for example, he may begin with the premise, I'm a miserable sinner, and so are you. If she's a psychotherapist, she's more likely to start with the equally incredible belief that attack is real for both herself and the patient, but that it doesn't matter. None of those things operate from the space of the divine. We are love, we are light, we are good. We are grand. We certainly aren't lowly, right? And attack is not real. And I know that may sound crazy, which is why you want to go through this, but when you begin to understand, it's just a perception. I think about relationships, and I think about one relationship in particular. It was a gentleman I was dating, and I sent him a text message, and the text message was just asking him a basic question, something he promised me that he'd forgotten about, and I was kind of reminding him. And he called me back, and he was convinced that I was attacking him. I was being petty, and I was trying to and do all these things. And none of that was in my intent. It was a simple matter of I remembered something that he promised that he hadn't fulfilled upon. And I sent him a reminder message. But there was no attack. But he was, and to some extent still is convinced that he was being attacked. So therefore he had to lash out at me. And I will tell you that in that experience, as a healer, right, someone who's working on this, it took something for me to respond versus react. Because I wanted to react. I could feel the energy rising. I could feel that ego in me want to be like, first, right? And I went there. I felt it coming up and I was like, first of all, and I was going ready to go all the way in. And I was just like, you know what? Nope. I'm not about to burn my food. And I was cooking dinner at the time. And I'm not about to do this. This doesn't work for me. And I completed with the person. Now, some people will look at, oh, so I'm like, no, it's not about being mad or not mad. Like it just didn't work. But I could be in that space of not having to call them and I don't have to do all of that because it's just like, I was like, instead I was asking myself, what was there for me to get out of this relationship? And so I look at him and I look back at that time with him and experience with him with love, with appreciation, because there was so many wonderful things I got out of it. And when it was complete, it was complete. It was complete. And so that's how we began to shift from being unhealed healers, which most of us are at the beginning, to actually being healed healers and therefore becoming light workers and miracle workers. Because once you get your healing, you're able to then share it with others. And so it talked about the miracle worker begins by perceiving light and translate his perception into sureness by continually extending it and accepting its acknowledgement. Its effects assure him it is there. Yeah. So when we learn how to perceive light, we do that and then we extend it out. And so I've been accused sometimes of being a bit Pollyanna-ish. And for a while, I didn't see that that was a compliment. People say, oh, you don't live in reality. The truth is most people don't live in reality. They live in unreality. Most people are in a shared dream state of not knowing who they truly are. And people who have become aware of the truth can be called Pollyanna sometimes, and that's okay. It's a badge of honor for me to walk in my light and have others acknowledge and see the light. Lets me know that I am operating in my Christ nature. And that's a good thing, even if it's rare right now. And our goal is to make it less rare and to have it be common. And instead, see the people who are unconscious or in sleep or dark be the rare case versus the norm. And so it says, by their fruits ye shall know them, and they shall know themselves. So if you want to look at where someone is along the journey, you look at their fruits. And I was just having this conversation today. We're talking about actions. Words are one thing, but you want to look at the results, look at the fruits people are bearing. And that gives you an idea of where they are in their life. And wherever you are is fine. You can be healed in one thing and in another area still be growing and developing, and that's okay. Mm. Moving to acceptance. Because this whole chapter again was about accepting the atonement. And the atonement is at one man. So we have to then begin to accept one another, accepting our brother, right? Because we're all in this together. And so as we learn to accept and love one another and operate from that, we grow in the spirit. We grow in the spirit. We grow in the spirit. And for me, that was mostly what I took away from that. And so, like, having to continually search my heart and search for areas where I'm not looking at my brother or my sister with love, and being willing when I find it, because it exists in all of us, it becomes a challenge sometimes. I will tell you what's going on in the world. Sometimes it's hard for me to find that love. an acceptance of someone and to see the good in them, or to accept that right now they're someone who's a little bit off their path, not necessarily evil, because that's not it's not and to really believe that, because I'm not perfect in this, and so it takes something. But the more we can do it, the more we can stay in our joy, more we can stay in love, more we can stay in life. One of the things we want to look at to see, are we inspiring joy in others? Yeah. And to be and have it as a goal. And have people, when they leave us, be inspired in spirit and be joyful. To look back fondly at the experience and the interaction with us. To be a blessing. To be a blessing. And so one way for you to kind of take a look at where you are on your journey is to look at, what are people experiencing when you're around? Are they enlivened and enlightened? If so, you're on track. And if not, it's just something to look at, and it's a goal to strive for, and looking at who would I and how would I have to be for that to be the case. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And then it's like how we begin to see ourselves. So we talked about forgiveness. We've talked about accepting our brothers. And it's really this part when it talks about how we see ourselves as we move towards the end of the chapter. And why, like I said, I started off with that quote, is because we're taught to see ourselves as small, as little, as bad, as incapable, as wrong. And none of that is in alignment with who Spirit says we are. If we look at the master teacher inside of this particular pathway to the divine, so there's multiple pathways to the divine, Jesus did not shrink himself. He didn't devalue who he was. He spoke like, I am the way and the light. I am the Son of God. He spoke it. He also shared that the things weren't done by him, they were done through the Christ in him, which is the divine in him. So he also was humble enough to know that it's not me, but it's the God in me. That's from a Mary Mary song, one of my favorite songs. It's the God in me. But as a person who's chosen to allow Spirit to work through me, I'm able to do great things. And when we do great things, we claim it. We acknowledge ourselves. We are perfect, whole, and complete at our true selves, at our core. And we're in the journey to realize that and express that day to day. But at your core, if you really get that there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing for you to fix, you get that can be a shift. There's nothing wrong with you. I say instead, there's just some things you gotta release so that you can be your true, authentic self. But inherently, nothing is wrong. All is well. You are well. And we're just getting back to our true, authentic state. And so if you get that who you are is important, that you have a purpose, you're not here by mistake, there's a role you play in the great tapestry that is the divine, you're important to how this whole thing unfolds. And that has been one of the things I've had to be really diligent to get, like, I matter. Because sometimes you can feel like you don't matter. I know I did, and I have. And so reminding myself, I matter. My contribution matters. And it can seem sometimes so small to you, but not understanding the impact that who you are being or not being has. If I touch one life and that person touches 1,000 lives, I've touched 1,000 lives. The smallest thing can have the biggest impact. There is no order in miracles, is what we're taught a lot of times in this text. So don't compare yourself with this person has $10 million and I only have $500, so obviously they're worth more. No. In fact, by them having $10 million, it means they're charged to do more. A lot of the times. You do yours, they do theirs. Don't worry about their journey. Focus on your own. Yeah. And so as we end the chapter, we start talking about the idea of grandeur versus grandiosity, and how grandeur is of God and only of God, whereas grandiosity, showboating, is a cover for despair. And so it reminded me of when my mother used to say, I'm not conceited, I'm convinced. Like knowing who you are and being confident in that is distinct than being conceited. It's different from being arrogant. But knowing, like, yeah, I am fabulous, and so are you, or I am fabulous because, like, I'm a creation of the divine. Like, hello, like, I'm a miracle. I'm a walking miracle. Grandeur. Grandiosity is trying to, impress and compete and create levels. Like, I am fabulous, and because you're not, I deserve special treatment, versus I'm just fabulous, and so are you. And it didn't have to be who's more or less fabulous, you just are. And so giving up competition is one of the key things in accepting this atonement. And it's one of the things we struggle with a lot because the society talks a lot about competition. In writing my business plan and a lot of things I do with playing sports, trying to always convince me to look at, well, how do you do in comparison to others? And my advice, look at how you do in comparison to yourself. No matter what you're doing, asking yourself, am I doing my very best? And however that falls out in terms of rankings is what it is. A lot of the times as we do this work or as we walk in our path, we begin to find out our strengths and our weaknesses based on if you go hard with everything you do, and then you begin to look at the leaderboard and you find that I'm excelling in these areas. Consider that those are sometimes your gifts. That's what you want to be focusing on because that's what you excel in. But it doesn't make you any better or worse than someone else because their gifts may be somewhere else, knowing that we all have them. We're all important. We're all grand. So you don't have to try to outshine someone else. Just shine. And you'll be seen in your time and in your place. And trust and believe that. The ego wants you to believe that there is orders, that you're not good enough, that you sometimes have to hide the truth of who you are. And people do that. So we we try to put on airs and all sorts of things, hoping that no one looks behind the curtain. But get that who you are exactly as you are is enough. You are a uniquely and wonderfully made expression of the divine. Whatever it looks like, sounds like, it doesn't matter. And if you're able to really know that and stand on that, then how you move through the world is transformed. You begin to have more ease and grace because you're not anxious about being exposed. You're beautiful and you're wonderful just as you are. And so for me, like I said, this chapter very much resonated with the quote from, of course, from A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. Which is our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that others don't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. As we accept this atonement, as we accept the reality that God's will is our will, and that the ego and the will of the world does not serve our highest, best, and good, and that there's nothing to be afraid of in stepping into your divine purpose and accepting who you are, you will begin to find more love, more light, more miracles. Things will begin to open up for you because you're walking in truth. And truth truly does set us free. And sometimes that freedom can be mistaken with something to be afraid of because it looks totally different than the life we have been living, a life of bondage, a life of concern, a life of feeling inadequate or not enough. But the truth is that you are enough and that you can do it and that you have all you need to live the life you want. So if you want a new life, you're going to definitely need a new thought. And so begin and continue to do the lessons in the workbook because they will help you take this from something theoretical to something practical so that you begin to live it and walk in it day by day. This has been New Thought, New Life. This is Kanaya Kennedy, and we looked at Chapter 9 of A Course in Miracles. As we bring this session to a close, we just take a moment to reflect upon what was shared today. Taking the time to know that whatever was revealed to you during this time is what was meant for you. I thank you for being here with me today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share. I'm grateful for the medium and the tools that allow me to do this, that allow me to give, which then opens me up to receive more. I claim my prosperity, my abundance, and my divine surplus as I continue on the 40-day prosperity plan. And I affirm the same for you. Until the next time, be well and stay fabulous.